Have you ever worked in Google Docs and then as you look at your document, you realize that if you just organize that information a little bit differently, that it might be more easy to understand and read for anyone who looks at that document? Well, one of the solutions might be, instead of lists or tabs, might be tables. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Consumer Technology Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library, and today let's look at Google Docs tables. For our first example, let's create a relatively simple table that's based on temperatures. Now, it could be that you're a farmer or a gardener who really likes to get into the details, and as you see the trends in the different temperatures, that might give you an idea of when you want to plant some seeds. On the other hand, you might be a needle worker of some kind, and so for you, whether you quilt or crochet or knit, you might be following the latest trends, or at least one of them, where people create a quilt or an afghan or a blanket that is based on daily temperatures for a year. It could also be that you have someone that you are trying to help with a science fair project. And again, keeping track of temperatures is what is going to be important. So to do that, we're going to go up to the menu bar, to the fourth choice here, which is Insert, and click, and we want to insert a table. Now, as I hover my mouse over the possibilities here, and really this is sort of like a little waffle grid, where as I move my mouse over those squares, you can see down at the bottom part of that dialog box that it says right now 4 by 1. So I've selected 4 columns in one row. And then all I have to do is just move my mouse down, and now I have 4 by 2. So that would give me a heading row and then the first row of information. And I might decide that that's what I want to do, or I could even make it larger if I wanted to do that. Well, let's say that I want to go with that 4 by 2, and so to select those squares, I click in the one that's in the lower right, where my mouse is right now, and click. And now I have a grid on my paper that lets me add a table and put in information. So as I look in the upper left of this table that I've created, you can see that I have a blinking insertion point, and so that is where I would be doing my typing. So today, since we're going to keep track of daily temperatures, let's put in date, and then I would simply tab to move over to the next cell. And then it depends on what I'm trying to do. Some people just keep track of the average temperature, but other people like to have the low and the high and the average. So I haven't quite decided what I want to do yet. So I'm going to type low and then tab. I'll type high and tab. And then in that last cell in that first row, I'm going to type average. Now, how do I get down to the next row? Well, it's just very simple. I simply press tab, and it takes me down to the first cell in the next row. And so now I could type a date, and I'm just going to make up one here. And then I could type in a low, and tab, and a high, and tab, and then an average. And if I decide that I want to add a new row, all I need to do is press tab again, and it adds in that new row. And so I can continue typing if I so choose. Now, let's say that I made a mistake when I typed that 70.71, and it should really be 70.75. But here I am down in the second row, and I'm kind of getting ready to type it. Well, I can very easily back up by using Shift Tab. So let me press Shift Tab, and it takes me to that 70.71, where now I could make a really quick edit, and then tab to get back down to my new row, where as I tab, I can put in more information. So I'll put a 60 here, and tab, 76, and tab, and the average is 66.44. If I want another row, all I need to do is tab again. Now you may have noticed that because the table as it's created is going to fill up that entire page, or at least the width of that page, that the columns are really kind of wide for the information that I'm using. So I have two ways to fix that and narrow the columns down. By the same token, if they come in and they're kind of narrow for your data, here's the same way that you could widen them out. So let's look up at the ruler, where just above this first border line, you can see that there's kind of a gray square there. And I could rest my mouse on it and click and drag it, and it moves that border line over. Let me do that again. So here, just to the right of the 3, I have that little gray square, and again, it's right above that border line. I even kind of have dots right above the border line. Rest my mouse on it, click and drag, and now I've moved that line over. Now there's another way to do this that you may find even easier, and that is I simply rest my mouse on top of the border line, and I get that same mouse pointer that has two vertical lines that are parallel to each other, and then arrows pointing to the left and right, meaning that's the way that I can drag. And then I simply click and drag, and I've changed the width of that column. Let me even make that a little narrower. Now, for the last column, I definitely want to come over to the far right, find that border line, find that mouse pointer that's the two vertical lines and the two arrows, and click and drag. And now I've resized that table. And just that quickly, we've created a table and put in information and changed the column widths. Now, if for any reason you want to change the row height, you can use that same idea where you could rest your mouse on a border line, and you'll notice that now we have horizontal parallel lines with arrows that point up and down, and we can click and drag up or down to make our rows taller or shorter. We could also come out to the left, although I find these lines a little harder to line up for some reason. So again, I could find that line, and then in the middle of the gray area, I have little dots that I can rest my mouse on. I can get that mouse with the arrows pointing up and down, and then I can just simply drag up or down depending. And so I can resize the rows that way. For our next example, we have a list of names, and they're kind of random in how they're arranged. So it could be that their name was taken as they walked in the door to an event, for example. And then we have their address, and we find that this information is fairly helpful, but it would be even more helpful if we actually labeled what the information is. So what I want to do is click in this first row and then go to the menu bar, and to the right of insert we have format. So we'll click format. And as I go down format, now you would think that table would be the second choice, just like it was for insert, but no, what we're going to do is come, oh gosh, at least 2/3 of the way down to table. And then we get all of these choices for editing a table and changing the format for the table. And so this first section lets us insert a row above or below where we've clicked, or we can insert a column or to the left or the right of where we've clicked. Well, we want to insert a row above, so we'll select that. And now I can very easily type name and tab, type street and tab, city, tab, state, tab, and zip. And so now we've added information above the existing table. Well, we might also decide that we want to add in some columns. For example, I've clicked here on street, but it could be that we want to add a column for nickname after name and before street. So we could go back up to format and then down to table. And in this case, we would want to insert a column to the left of where we've clicked. And we could type nickname. And then we also want a phone number, and I think maybe phone goes over here to the right of zip, but that puts us to the edge of the paper, so I'm going to narrow down nickname a bit. And then street, because what happens is, as you adjust for one column, then you need to adjust for the other columns as well. And now, as I click on zip, I'm going to go back to format, go down to table, and insert a column to the right, and we'll call that phone. And so, even though I started with a basic table, it's very easy to add the formatting that we need to add. So for phone, I'm even going to type in a phone number, just to see if that's even close to the right width. And no, it's not, so I want to widen that out. All right, so again, very easy to change the formatting. Now, what happens if after I've added everybody in and I've talked to everyone in the group, I realize that no one has a nickname and that column isn't needed? Well, again, I just click in that column and I go to format, come down to table, and the second grouping here is to delete a row or a column, or I could even delete the entire table. So I'm going to delete that column. And now nickname is gone. Now it could be that we also have someone who comes to whatever meeting this is, and then they decide that they don't want to be a member, they don't want to return, and so we need to get rid of them as well. Well, we could click here on Morris Franklin, go to format, go to table, and we could delete a row. And now that person is gone. Well, what if we need to add another person? Well, let's say that that person needs to be added between Ralph and Maggie here. Well, we could click on Ralph, go to format, go to table, and this time we could insert a row below. And now we've got that row, so we'll just type new person here. And we could add in that person's information too. When you look at a table, sometimes you're going to find that the rows are an inconsistent height, for example, or definitely the columns are an inconsistent width. And you might decide at some point to try to even up everything so that you have cells that are just more regular in size. So let's just click somewhere in our table here and go back to format and then come down to table. And first, let's distribute our rows. And let me click off a second, because we can see here that while Angela has a fairly tall cell, Jessica and Maggie have shorter cells, as does Ralph, but then Arthur, the new person, have the taller cells as well. So we have about a half and half split here between taller cells and shorter cells, but we'd like for them to all be the same. So let's go back to format, go to table, and let's distribute rows and see what happens. So when I click, now we have all of the rows exactly the same height, and that should work fairly well for you. Now, we could do the same thing also with columns, but notice that the information in our columns when we go horizontally across is all different sizes. So state only has 2 letters, whereas the city has a whole lot more. But let's see what happens, and then we can always undo. So we could go to format, and we can go to table, and we can distribute columns and click. And now all of the columns are the same width, but notice that by doing that, the street addresses are now moved to 2 lines instead of just 1. And so that's a call that you're going to need to make when you distribute the columns in a table. And as a matter of fact, I think I'm going to undo. I kind of like that a little bit better. Something else that you may decide to do from time to time is to combine the cell information. So for example, we have Independence, Missouri 64052. What happens if we decide that we want to take those 3 cells and put them together in one cell instead? Well, we can do that. We can go back up to Format and then down to Table. And kind of at the bottom of these choices, we have Merge Cells. So let's click and see what happens here. Well, that's sort of an unpredicted kind of result in that now it's merged the cells so that you have a cell that is 3 columns wide, and yet it has moved Missouri and the zip code below. So I would need to actually come over to Independence and maybe press the delete key and backspace, and then go to Missouri and maybe space and then delete, so that I could get all of that information on one line across those combined columns. So there's a certain amount of work that may need to happen when you decide to merge cells. Now we could also unmerge, so let's go back to Format, down to Table, and then we can also unmerge. And now we have the 3 columns again, and I would need to move the data back. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut and paste because it didn't just naturally move the information for me. So again, I may need to be doing some editing if I merge or if I unmerge. Now let's investigate the last option when we go to Format Table. So I'm going to click in the table and then go to Format and down to Table. And at the very bottom of that list of options, we have Table Properties. So let's click on Table Properties and see what's here. Well, right now it says that the table border is black and it's a ½ point. Well, let's change that. So let's kind of make it a dramatic change. Let's make it a blue and maybe 1½ points. And click OK. And now we have a different border, very bright blue. Maybe not my choice, but for this example, not bad. Let's see what else we can do here. Notice that I've clicked in our top row where we have our column headings. So when I go back to Format and Table and down to Table Properties, the next choice is Cell Background Color, and right now it's saying that it's white. So I would probably, for a cell background color, choose a lighter color so that if I have text, we can see the text. So I have light cornflower. Let's click that, click OK. Now, this only put the background in the one cell where I was clicked. So if I would like to carry that across that whole row, I need to select the entire row and then go back to Format and Table Properties, and then we can go back to that light cornflower blue 3. And while we're here, we could also look at the cell vertical alignment. Right now we can see that our headings are in the middle of that cell vertically, but we could put them at the top or at the bottom. So first of all, let me just go with top so we can see how that looks along with our light blue. So we'll click OK. And the cells that I've selected have moved up, whereas name I didn't have selected because it was already light blue, and so it is still in the middle. So we have a pretty good comparison here of how that looks. Well, let's select all of those cells Now let's go back to Format and down to Table, and then Table Properties. And this time let's also look at the cell vertical alignment as being bottom, and click OK. And so that moves all of them down to the bottom. And that might be precisely what you would like. I think I tend to probably go with that idea as well. Matter of fact, while we have these column headings, let's make them bold, but then let's also go back to Format, Table, Table Properties, and let's move them back to the middle. If you have a table that is large enough and it goes to a second page or a third page or a fourth page, you need to decide if you want to allow the row to overflow across pages. In other words, do you need your table to stop at the end of a page, or do you want a row to be able to continue over to another page? And that can be an important consideration, although for our small table, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. Then it talks a little bit about your column width, and so we could very manually right here put in a number for the column width and for the minimum row height. And this would be another way to very easily change all of the columns or all of the rows at the same time. Cell padding has to do with when I put text in a cell, there is still a margin around that text that if I go past that margin, I'll go down to a second line within a cell, for example. And so I can change the cell padding so that the text is closer to the border. Let's kind of go crazy here. Let's go with, that's 0.6. So we'd want to make it maybe 0.09. And let's click OK and let's see what happens. And you can see how we've kind of moved maybe a little bit, although maybe I need to make it even more exaggerated. So let me select those cells again. Let's go to Format, Table, go to the Table Properties, and instead of getting bigger, let's get smaller. So let's do 0.01. And you'll notice now that they have moved over much closer to the border. There is one more setting under Table Properties, so let's look at that. But first, let's click in our table, then go to Format, and as we go to Table and Table Properties, if we go to the lower right, we can see that there is a possibility of changing the table alignment. And right now, ours is left aligned. But if we click the drop down, we could center this table horizontally over the page. So let's click Center and click OK. And now it is centered on the page. And occasionally that is really what you want to do to make the table stand out a little bit more on the printed page. You could also align it to the right. So let's look at that briefly. We can go to Format, Table, Table Properties. Instead of Center, we'll go to the drop down and click Right, and then click OK. And it moves it to the right, and there might be a time when maybe you want to put some sort of an image or some sort of text on the left-hand side and then put the table to the right. So that is a possibility, but I think we're going to go back to Format, Table, and Table Properties and center the table on the page, and we'll click OK. Now, the tables in Google Docs don't have the formatting possibilities that Word has because, again, the idea with Google products is they keep the idea simple, they give you the basics that you need, but if you want to get more complicated, sometimes there are add-ons that you can add on and use those to help you do what you would like to do. So we could go to add-ons here in the menu bar and then get add-ons. And then in the search bar here where it says search apps, I could type tables. And when I type tables, it gives me some of the possibilities for bringing information into my Google Docs document. So Bjorn's tables, it looks like this takes spreadsheets And they would need to probably be fairly small spreadsheets, but take spreadsheets and then adapt them to a docs table or random tables. And again, it's just an add-on that calls a function in a Google Sheet, and then it writes that result to docs. The highlight tool is something that you might want to use because, well, otherwise there isn't a highlighting tool for tables. And then as I scroll down, you can see that there are other possibilities for add-ons for tables. So you may want to investigate and scroll through. Oh, look at this one, a Sudoku table generator. So some fun things along with some various serious possibilities. So I hope that you will go look at the add-ons and see what is there too. To learn even more, visit mymcpl.org/online learning, where you will find online resources that include Universal Class, LinkedIn Learning, and Learning Express Library. Be sure to join us each week as we present a variety of tech topics. Each week we premiere 3 new videos. You'll be able to find them at 1 o'clock on Wednesday and Friday, or at 2 o'clock on Tuesday. You can find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, or if you prefer, be sure to subscribe to our MCPL MO channel on YouTube, where you'll be able to find our MCPL Consumer Technology Resources playlist.